On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, the free agency dust has sort of settled, and we dig into what comes next for the Toronto Raptors, and is it a Pascal Siakam trade? We'll examine some of the potential suitors and whether or not a deal is fit to be made. Plus, Jalen McDaniels, a nice little signing from over the weekend, and some numbers to dig into exactly what a loss Fred VanVleet will be for the Raptors. We'll get into all that on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks for hanging.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? And welcome to another episode of Locked On Raptors, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It is Tuesday, July the 4th. Happy 4th to our American listeners. Hope everyone had a lovely long weekend up here in Canada as well. And I'm, of course, your host, Sean Woodley. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors now for 9 seasons on various platforms. You can find all my work over on Twitter at WoodleySean. You can follow, subscribe to, rate, and review the podcast for free on your favorite podcast app of choice. And we are, of course, on YouTube as well. Please go hit the big red subscribe button over there to support the show in video form. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON as well. A reminder before we dive into the stuff today, the Locked On Raptors Discord server still going strong, adding more people by the day. It's the link is in the description. It's super fun. It's a great way to get out the off-season angst, I would say. Argue about trades among friends, fake trade stuff. It's all in there. Come hang out. Super fun. And I love seeing the listeners of the show flock to the Discord. All right, on today's show, lots of stuff to dig into. We, of course, last recorded on Saturday after the news that Fred VanVleet had signed the 3-year, $130 million deal that will make him a Houston Rocket and leave the Raptors with some figuring out to do. We'll dig into what might be next in that figuring out process and how it relates to Pascal Siakam. Of course, some reports over the weekend from Michael Grange that Siakam's name is out there in the ether trade-wise. We'll dig into the Atlanta Hawks as a particular potential trade partner there coming up in just a moment here. We'll also get into the Jalen McDaniels signing, which I'm actually pretty happy about, and I think kind of opens up some interesting options for the Raptors going forward here. And then I want to close it out. I have a few numbers, just kind of looking now that the depth chart, if it wants to be, is kind of set. We'll see if a trade comes down and changes it and blows it all up. But as it stands right now, you can kind of squint and see what the Raptors depth chart's going to look like. And there's a couple things very notably missing, things that Fred VanVleet brought that nobody else brings. We'll get into that at the end of the show. But let's start with Pascal and the trade scuttlebutt around the best player on the Toronto Raptors and one of the best players in Toronto Raptors history. Over the weekend, Michael Grange reporting, that Siakam's name is kind of out there now as a potential name to watch. I believe he kind of doubled down on it yesterday on the Raptors show with Will Liu, and it makes sense, right? Like, people who listen to this show know that I am a big Pascal Siakam enjoyer, right? I can't look at this entirely with like clear lenses just because everything I look at through basketball or through the Raptors is like Pascal Siakam tinted. I love Pascal Siakam. I love watching Pascal Siakam. I think his story has been a delight to follow. It's just, it's tough to confront the potential of him moving on, but you can't argue with the logic of it right now, with where the Raptors sit, with what happened over the weekend with Fred VanVleet walking and the run-it-back plan kind of getting nuked. There is certainly an argument to be made that now is the time to try to move on from Pascal Siakam. He's got 1 year left on his deal. After that, he'll be due for a max or near max contract. And, not that the Raptors shouldn't want to pay him that money, because I think you should. Pascal Siakam's awesome. I don't think he's going to age particularly ungracefully over the course of the next contract that he signs. Having him on your team would be a good thing. And it should be noted as well, he has made it pretty clear in many different fashions that Toronto's where he wants to be. You shouldn't just scoff at that. That should be something that kind of factors into your consideration here. It's not often that two-time All-NBA players declare that they want to play for your franchise. It's just not a very common thing in the NBA. And so, while I think there's no obligation to trade Pascal right now because of the fact that you could extend him in theory this summer, because of the fact that he's just really good and it's probably worth keeping a really good player on your basketball team. The way the things are set up right now for the Raptors, the way the Fred VanVleet thing kind of spoils the ideal vision of running it back, and sort of the optimized version of next year's team is just a little bit less potent now. I can totally see the argument if someone comes along looking for Pascal Siakam and is offering you a big haul. I think you probably got to look at it, as much as it pains me to say. Again, that's not to say that they have to make this move. They're under no obligation to go trade Pascal right now. But if a team does come out of the woodwork and has a substantial offer that kind of helps reset the roster and optimize it more for Scotty Barnes, which I don't think you can argue right now the roster is optimized for Scotty Barnes. There's just not enough shooting on the floor in particular. I think you got to look at it. So let's get into this from the Atlanta perspective, right? Atlanta's been the team that's tossed around for a little bit of time now as far as the most likely suitor for Pascal. And, it makes sense considering Pascal spent his career demolishing the Atlanta Hawks every time they play. It would make sense there's maybe some affinity for the player there in Atlanta. Get him inside the house so he stops ruining our lives every time we play, huh? It's tough. The Hawks, I think, right now are probably, if you just look at like what they would have to offer of the realistic trade partners, they're probably the most appealing if you're a Raptors fan, if you're the Toronto Raptors themselves. But even then, I don't think it's just like this hand in glove, okay, there's a very easy trade, go make it type of thing. And I do think it figures to be a pretty protracted negotiation if the Raptors and Hawks are going to get something done here. And I would imagine it's not going to happen like immediately. There's a lot of factors that go into this, right? For the Hawks, they've kind of reached this point with their roster where, like, have they kind of maxed it out? Have they built it well enough around Trae Young? Should they just kind of pivot and sort of reassemble this thing around Trae Young to try to make it work one last time? You could argue that they're probably at that point. The problem is that I see this being a pretty drawn out talk, and it might just lead nowhere because Atlanta's coming at this from a pretty bizarre place. They've just sent out a ton of picks to get DeJounte Murray a year ago, right? And I can't imagine they're going to have much of an appetite for sending out more draft capital for a guy who only has 1 year left on his contract. As much as I think the sort of idea that a team that trades for Pascal is going to be tough to re-sign him, I don't really buy that, because look around the NBA. Where is the cap space coming from for any of these teams? Yes, some teams can maneuver and get themselves to cap space if they want. We saw that with the Sacramento Kings, for example, but it's not exactly easy to do. And while the cap is rising like 10% every year, it seems, that's still not quick enough of a rising of the cap to just create a bunch of cap space for Pascal Siakam to go walk into next summer. And I do think just having his bird rights is going to be super valuable. How many players got a max contract in free agency this year? I believe it's exactly one, and that was Fred VanVleet. Otherwise, it's hard out there to go and walk into some team's space. It's really difficult to maneuver. A lot of teams are kind of entrenched in what their rosters are. And so if you're the Hawks, I think you probably stand a better chance than maybe it seems from, the sort of 10,000-foot view of it all, of retaining Pascal if you trade for him. And so maybe you're less worried about the pick outlay, but I can totally understand not wanting to ship out more picks in the future if you're the Hawks, considering what you just did for DeJounte Murray in a move that didn't really work all that well for you. The other thing is Atlanta has young prospects. A lot of interesting ones. Onyeka Okongwu, really exciting young prospect. AJ Griffin, Kobe Buffkin, my dude. Jalen Johnson. I can imagine there would be haggling over who and how many of that group eventually go back to Toronto in a trade here, right? Again, the Siakam thing kind of hangs over it all. The Raptors are not obligated to trade him because they can, in theory, offer him the extension and lock him up. Maybe look to trade him down the line. And the Hawks are concerned because it's only 1 year left in the deal. Like, I get it. These are the things that creep into negotiations all the time. I think if I'm the Hawks, the argument that I'm making if I'm the Raptors is like Pascal Siakam would be the best teammate Trae Young's ever had, and would be the best fitting good teammate that he's ever had as well. That would be a tremendous fit on both ends of the floor. Maybe not on defense, because can you really fit anybody with Trae Young on defense? Maybe not. But, Siakam offers some help side rim protection, that sort of backline defense that could be very useful on a Hawks team that needs a lot of backline defense because of all of the, the hemorrhaging that goes on in their perimeter. That's a consideration. When it comes to Murray, Obviously DeJounte Murray would be the guy coming back the other way, presumably, to sort of balance out that Hawks roster. It gets the Raptors a look at Murray. I think it's worthwhile if you're the Raptors to like get one season looking at DeJounte Murray, but I also think a thing that could be a hang up here is DeJounte Murray that much of a better fit with Scottie Barnes than Pascal Siakam is? I would actually argue no. Like, we've seen proof of concept for the Scottie Pascal kind of dueling heads of the snake thing down the stretch of the 21-22 season, and they were fantastic. And I think their playmaking, their intelligence, their passing, working off of one another can absolutely work. It's a little bit more tricky with a non-shooting big man in Jakob Poeltl, but that's not tied to Siakam and Barnes and their own sort of simpatico as players. And I think there's a real case that Siakam's just a better fit than Murray is. Murray's not some guy who's going to, play off of Scottie as a dribble handoff hub and pull up and rise and fire for threes. He's not a great three-point shooter. He's not a terribly efficient player in general. Very good defender. I mean, the Raptors' defense would be fantastic with him at the point of attack, but it's not like this hand in glove fit or anything like that. You probably got to look at it, but I don't think Murray is sort of the attractive piece of this deal. And so you'd probably have the Raptors being like, well, we need at least two of Griffin and Bufkin and Okongwu, or that's probably where they start. There are draft picks to be had as well. And I kind of feel like this is the sort of trade negotiation where neither side feels like they're getting enough, and so it probably breaks down, and you end up with Pascal Siakam returning, and I also think that's perfectly fine if that's the case, right? Like, it's not an ideal setup. This team is not necessarily suited to amplify Pascal Siakam right now, but having him on the team with the opportunity to extend him and then maybe trade him down the line when he has more term on his deal, and some other team can be like, all right, let's do this, and you're not sort of dealing in the market of teams that are comfortable with a 1 year, almost maybe rental. You're dealing with, all right, you've got 3 or 4 years on your deal here. Let's trade you to a team where you can partner up with somebody and have a bit more of an extended runway. I think that's a perfectly viable outcome here as well. So I would say, just reading between the lines, I have no intel whatsoever. My guess is it doesn't actually end up happening, and Pascal sticks with the Raptors and either extends this summer or goes into the season with sort of the Raptors intending to keep him around long term. He said all the things that suggest that he's not going to be a major flight risk or anything like that. But, obviously if you're the Raptors, you have to consider that part too. You just lost Fred VanVleet for nothing after thinking he wasn't going to be a flight risk either. So there's risk in all of this. But yeah, I would say I don't think it's terribly likely. If it does happen, I think the Hawks are the most likely team. I can't really see another suitor out there. The Jazz maybe could get something together. Maybe the Kings with Harrison Barnes extending and being trade eligible. Maybe there's enough money there to make something work with Keegan Murray as a big piece coming back. It's hard to say right now, but I think the Hawks are the most likely partner. They're an okay partner, not a perfect partner, and I think the negotiation could get pretty tricky there. And you'll get all the leaks of, the Raptors are overvaluing their guys. But you know what? Like, Pascal would be the best player in that trade, and they're not under any obligation to trade him. And I think that's just maybe just a narrative we're going to have is, the Raptors overvalue those guys. That's like the easiest thing to leak to make yourself look good as a front office ever now. So I don't know. I don't know how much I buy into it. Either way, that's the Pascal situation. I'm sure we'll keep talking about this throughout the week and dig into it as more reports and subterfuge and scuttlebutt come out. Maybe there's something over Summer League that goes down, but I'm holding my breath on anything happening. Or I'm not holding my breath? Yeah, I don't want to hold my breath because I don't want to run out of breath because I think it's going to be a long time until something like that gets done, if anything. Let's get into Jalen McDaniels in a second here, right? New signing for the Raptors. Pretty exciting one, I think, as far as, 2-year, $9 million signings go. We'll get into what he brings to the Raptors and why I think he opens up even more trade possibilities for the Raptors to try to rebalance their roster, maybe get some of the stuff they lost with Fred VanVleet going out the door. We'll dig into that in just 1 second. Before we do, however, got to tell you about our good friends over at Prize Picks, who've made daily fantasy sports super fun, super engaging, and really the best place to go if you want to play daily fantasy. Usually when you play fantasy sports, you're dealing with having to set your lineup every day. It's such a slog. Oh my God, is this guy out of the lineup? How am I going to react to this injury? You don't have to deal with that with Prize Picks. It's just that night you go and pick your players you want on your entry, and all you're doing is picking whether they're going to get more or less than their projection in a given stat. It's that easy. There's no shadow expert with a team you got to try to beat behind the scenes. It's just you against the projected numbers, and that is the way it should be. So go and play Prize Picks right now. You can pick 2 to 6 players on any entry, and if you you win, you can hit up to 25 times your money back on any entry. Again, no competing with other people, and it's really for any sport under the sun. You've got right now the WNBA going strong. You've got baseball season rolling through as well. Maybe you want to put some in the All-Star game or something like that. You can go do that at Prize Picks as well. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You get safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada in every province except for Ontario. Download the Prize Picks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, Prize Picks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, they'll give you $50. They're going to match whatever you put in. Don't forget to the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for the instant deposit match up to $100 with Prize Picks. All right, let's continue on here. Jalen McDaniels. Let's dig in, shall we? Jalen McDaniels, the former Charlotte Hornet, of course, and most recently, after the trade deadline, Philadelphia 76ers signs with the Toronto Raptors for the biannual exception, by all reports, for 2 years, $9 million. I think it's a tidy little piece of business for the Raptors. It's obviously like you lose Fred VanVleet and your response moves are Dennis Schroeder and Jalen McDaniels, and it feels a little bit muted in terms of excitement. But I do think Jalen McDaniels is a pretty interesting little play here for the Raptors. You know, he's been around the way for a few years now, spent a lot of time in the G League, making his way into the NBA. Last season was his best year, you know, for this sort of the full breadth of the season. 80 games played, started 24 between the Hornets and the Sixers, 9.4 points, 4.3 boards, 1.6 assists, a steal, and 0.4 blocks across 24 minutes a game. And I think the thing here that's kind of intriguing is the shooting upside for Jalen McDaniels. Like, he's not like a knockdown dude going to walk in and shoot 39% for you. That's not who Jalen McDaniels is. But there are some sort of bright spots on his shooting track record that would suggest there's something there as far as upside to tap into as like a catch and shoot guy off the ball who can, you know, maybe attack a closeout with his length and kind of get to the bucket and all of that. Just to look at some of the recent numbers, during his brief time with Philly, just 24 games, only played 18 minutes a game. So, you know, take it for what it's worth, and only 1.3 attempts, but 40% down the stretch of the season. A nice little run of shooting for Jalen McDaniels playing with the Sixers. Before that, you know, he was only a 32% shooter on 3.6 attempts for the Hornets last year in 56 games. Obviously, the Hornets not playing in a terribly conducive to success environment, probably the worst offense in basketball. You know, Jalen McDaniels obviously wasn't like a solution in that or anything like that, but was not, I would say, like the biggest problem on that team by any means. And, you know, maybe with better quality looks with better teammates, he's got a better 3-point percentage than he had last year. The year before that, where LaMelo Ball notably was playing basketball, I believe, and not the year last year where he wasn't playing at all, shot 38% across 55 games on 2 attempts a game. That is something to sort of note, I think. Overall, pretty good free throw shooter throughout his career as well. Last year, 84% from the line. That's encouraging. 78% as a career free throw shooter. So there's a little bit of touch. We know that free throws are sort of one of the more indicative stats to say, hey, like, this guy's got a shot to shoot threes at least. There's no guarantee by any means, but it's something. And I think that's nice. And I think just adding McDaniels into the bench mix, it gives you a little more insurance if Precious Achiuwa's 3-point shot's never coming back. If Chris Boucher is, you know, going to continue to be a 30-ish% 3-point shooter, it gives you the sort of upside of someone who might actually become a pretty decent shooter for you, a league average or better 3-point shooter, playing in those second units, which were so starved of any space last year. You can now kind of envision some pretty fun second units right now where, you know, you throw in a Grady Dick and maybe you sprinkle in a Gary Trent Jr. and OG. You have Jalen McDaniels playing the 4, and then all of a sudden, oh, there's like some shooting in this second look, and there's like someone to space on the wings for whoever is running point, whether it's Dennis Schroeder or Pascal Siakam or Scotty Barnes or whomever. You know, it's a nice bit of versatility, a nice bit of just kind of optionality to the Raptors lineups. And I think, like, on the whole, we'll get into the depth chart in a second, but I think on the whole, if you look at just the quality of players kind of in the second unit for the Raptors, like, they look a lot deeper than they did last year. McDaniels is a nice addition. Schroeder is a perfectly competent backup point guard. I don't think he should be starting, but, you know, he's a perfectly competent backup who's had some success. And, you know, I think against lesser competition, against second units can be just fine. there's more depth here. There's more sort of like viable NBA players, more combinations of lineups. Grady Dick obviously is going to come in off the bench and be asked to do a lot as he needs to help replace the departing 3-point volume of Fred VanVleet. There's something there. I still really question like who ties it all together, because they don't have a point guard right now, or at least a good point guard who can sort of be your main initiator most times down the floor. Dennis Schroeder is not that. But, there's something there. And I think, that there are ways in which this sort of bench can be morphed as well and kind of create a little bit more balance. And I do think bringing in McDaniels opens up more possibility for trades, whether it's Chris Boucher, who we've talked about a ton. Can you flip him to the Wizards for DeLon Wright and get some other ball handling on this team? The Wizards incentivized to do that. I kind of feel like Chris Boucher on the Wizards is like destined to happen, as that's like the most Tampa Raptors-ish team there is in the NBA. So like just go let Chris Boucher cook next to Kyle Kuzma and Jordan Poole on the worst team to score 120 points a night in NBA history. I'd be down for that. That'd be fun. Maybe the Wizards aren't inclined to do that. Maybe they want DeLon for more having an adult in the room, et cetera, et cetera. But that's like a deal that's out there potentially for the Raptors if they want to go down that road. I also think Precious Achiuwa becomes an interesting trade candidate here too. And look, I love Precious. I'm like very much in on the Precious bandwagon. Everyone who listens to this show knows that. But I do think if you have Jalen McDaniels for the next couple years, are we sure, like certain, that Precious Achiuwa ever becomes an offensive player on the level of Jalen McDaniels? And that is not exactly a high bar to clear, but that's been the hang up for Precious, is he's had those moments, those flashes, the second half of 21-22, where he was incredible offensively, for his standards, and it made his defense so dynamic and valuable because he could be on the floor for 25, 30 minutes a game and you were okay with it. It was not the case last year. I don't profess to know where the real Precious Achiuwa lies offensively necessarily. But I do think if you're maybe sort of a little more skeptical if the offense is going to come along, he becomes kind of an interesting trade candidate. And maybe you can get something more as someone who has a little bit of upside in Precious. But, maybe you call up the Magic and say, hey, Cole Anthony, is he available for a trade in exchange for Precious Achiuwa? Is this something you'd want to do? Again, you have to have two sides want to tango in all these trades. And who's to say that anyone would want Precious Achiuwa in a deal? Because the Raptors, it's not like he's been outstanding for them or anything like that. I do think the defense is like pretty transcendently good at what it's out there. But again, he has to be on the floor for that to be effective. It's tough. Like you got to find, I think, a way to balance out this roster. We'll get to the depth chart in a second here, and it's so tilted towards bigs and forwards now that, it feels like something's got to give here. And the McDaniels move kind of lends like a pathway for that happening. But it's hard to sort, and you have to have other teams want to play ball, and there's only so many trades that can be made. There's a finite number of trade combinations that are out there, and you got to have teams wanting to do it. So we'll see. But I do think the McDaniels addition is a good one, and I think it opens up some optionality for the Raptors, both if they keep this whole bench unit together and they're not trading Precious or Boucher, or if they want to ship one of those guys out for a guard. McDaniels is there as a little insulation. You lose Precious, well, hey, McDaniels is there to kind of absorb the Precious role, and you can kind of survive with that. Even if, it'd be nice if Jalen McDaniels were Jaden McDaniels, his better brother for the Wolves, but Jalen's got some interesting stuff to tap into, I think, as a player overall. He's only 25 as well, so something there. We'll come back on the other side, round it out with a look at the depth chart, and a thing that is sorely missing without Fred VanVleet. Pull up threes, man. Where are they going to come from? It's really, really troubling. We're going to get to that in just 1 second. Before we do, however, got to tell you to go and check out Locked On Leafs, as the Toronto Maple Leafs had themselves a busy weekend. Some good moves, some not so good moves. And, our boys Mike and Dave will be breaking it all down over on Locked On Leafs. So please go check it out. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, let's round it out here with a look at the depth chart, shall we? I've got the banner running on the screen for those watching on YouTube, but I'll read off the depth chart kind of as it stands right now as well. At point guard, I guess Scotty Barnes is going to be listed there. Like, you got to put someone there, and so I guess it's Scotty. Even if I think Pascal's maybe more of a refined ball handler right now, for argument's sake, we'll just throw Scotty as the starting point guard right now. Dennis Schroeder backing him up, Malachi Flynn, third stringer. At shooting guard, Gary Trent Jr., Grady Dick, and then I have Joe Wieskamp / Jeff Doughton Jr. I know Joe Wieskamp's guarantee date was pushed till mid-July. Maybe he gets waived and Jeff Doughton gets his spot. Maybe someone else gets that spot. Maybe Kyle Lowry gets that spot once he's waived and stretched after a Damian Lillard trade. I don't know. But for now, Joe Wieskamp / Jeff Doughton is your sort of, 15th man, backup, third string shooting guard type. Small forward, OG Anunoby, Jalen McDaniels, Otto Porter Jr. Boy, it'd be nice if Otto Porter Jr. could play basketball next year. It would be quite an addition of shooting and, being an adult. Power forward, Pascal Siakam, Precious Achiuwa, Chris Boucher. Obviously Boucher and Achiuwa are kind of amorphous in where they slot in. Achiuwa could play anywhere between the 2 and the 5, frankly. Boucher, 4, 5, whatever. And then at the 5, of course, Jakob Poeltl, Christian Koloko. And then Thad Young in his rightful spot as a small ball 5 after the Raptors kept his contract on the books through his guarantee date. There's something there, right? There's you can squint and see some excitement. I think there will just be excitement kind of tied to Scotty Barnes getting thrown into the frying pan, as it were. There's going to be a lot put on him, and there will be some joy to be gleaned from that. I do really, really get concerned about the offense, though, man. I think the defense for this group could be really, really good. I think as it stands, there's a pathway, talent-wise, to a top 5 defense between Poeltl and Koloko soaking up the minutes at the 5, offering that rim protection. Their numbers when they were on the floor defensively last year were nuts. Koloko, when he was on the floor last year, turned the Raptors into the 2004 Pistons. It was ridiculous. Obviously small samples and everything, but those two guys as your back line, really impressive. You have OG Anunoby. He's outstanding. You have Achiuwa and McDaniels, who I think are really, really exciting defensive guys off the bench. You have, of course, Scotty Barnes, who I think took strides last year defensively. The big thing here is, can he improve as a point of attack defender? If he's going to be a point guard, that's a massive part of his development too. It's not just the offensive stuff. It's the defensive stuff at the point of attack where he really struggled. He doesn't use his length very well, right? He gets too far up into guys and doesn't trust his length to sort of corral them. He gets blown by pretty easily. His best defensive flourishes have come with him as a help side guy and being around the rim to protect it. It's just he's going to be asked to do a lot if he is, in fact, the point of attack defender guarding point guards for this Raptors team. But I still think, even with that, there's a lot of upside there. There's crazy length. This team is going to be a nightmare to play against defensively across the board. If you're starting Scotty, Trent, OG, Siakam, Poeltl, that is massive, and that is going to be a very good defensive lineup. Again, I think top 5 is not out of the question for this Raptors team. Problem is I think the offense could be bottom 5 and really, really could struggle. And it's just, I know there's the inclination to say, oh, Fred's gone. The Raptors are better now because he's not taking all those shots. No, it's not how basketball works, man. You have to have certain skills on your roster to amplify the players on the roster. And without a pull-up shooting threat, a credible pull-up shooting threat, which Fred VanVleet absolutely was, there's just less potency to this attack. And, we talk about, Darko Rajakovic wants to run this 0.5 offense. Everyone's just making decisions. Well, guess what? To make the decisions, there has to be an inciting incident to create the sort of cascading effect of advantage, good shot, great shot. Right now, there's no one to create that advantage in pick and roll. There will be ways to do it in dribble handoffs and post-ups and stuff like that, but Darko Rajakovic has written dissertations on pick and roll basketball. I think he wants to run a lot of pick and roll. I'm not sure how they effectively run a lot of pick and roll right now without a credible pull-up three-point shooter. Let's just take a look at some of these numbers. Last year, the Raptors as a team averaged 8.9 pull-up three-pointers a game. Fred VanVleet took 4.5 of those. Half of the Raptors' pull-up volume came from Fred VanVleet. He was also, in addition to being the highest volume pull-up shooter on the team, the most accurate. He shot 33.6% on pull-up threes, which is a pretty good mark. It was his catch and shoots that really let him down last year. 33.6 on pull-ups is good. Again, 4.5 attempts a game. The rest of the sort of core offensive pieces on this team: Gary Trent Jr., 2 pull-ups a game, 29.9%, bad, low volume. Pascal Siakam, 27.4% on 1 pull-up a game. OG Anunoby, 31.3% on 0.7 pull-ups a game. I don't know where the pull-up volume is coming from, and the pull-up shot in 2023 is incredibly important to basketball being played effectively on offense. Grady Dick, we all get excited about his three-point shooting, and I very much am. He's going to be awesome. I can't wait to watch Grady Dick fly around off screens and do his thing. But as much as the number has been out there of, he shot better than 50% on pull-ups in college, that's great. That's fantastic. Most of those pull-ups were the sort of relocation, essentially catch and shoots where you have one or two dribbles and you kind of relocate on the arc and pull up from there. Again, that's an impressive skill to have. It's very good, but it's not the type of defense bending, pull up at the top of the pick and roll, so you make the defense have to come out high and stretch itself in order to, garner against that threat. Like, it's non-existent on this roster right now. Dennis Schroeder doesn't do it. And they've got to find a way to create some sort of pull-up threat on this team. And maybe it's just that someone gets better at it. Maybe Scotty Barnes walks in next year and is hitting one pull-up three a game. I don't think that's going to happen because that's a lot to ask of a guy, and that is a very difficult skill to add into your bag in year three when there's a whole lot of other development going on as well. That's not realistic. If it happens, incredible. It's an absolute game changer, but you can't bank on that happening. And I just don't see another player on this team who's going to fill in that massive void of pull-up three-point shooting. Again, Fred VanVleet, not a perfect player by any means. The Raptors could not have possibly, in any universe, matched the money the Houston Rockets paid him. On its surface, $43 million for Fred VanVleet is crazy. It's nuts. I'm very happy he got the bag. The Raptors could not have, in good conscience, matched that to bring him back. But it does leave them with a massive void in pull-up shooting, and they don't have someone right now who can fill that in. And for that reason, I think this Raptors offense could very well be one of the 5 worst in basketball next year. Yes, they can go on the margins and do the offensive rebounding thing, but I don't know if that's going to be part of the plan here with, Darko Rajakovic coming in and replacing Nick Nurse. Granted, the Grizzlies were a very offensive rebounding heavy team. That's how they overcame their half-court issues. Maybe the Raptors stick with that. It's a strength of theirs. Darko's all about leaning into your strengths. Maybe they continue to be the offensive rebounding team that just collects bricks and puts them back up and in. But again, do you want to watch that again? That wasn't very impressive last year. It wasn't exactly conducive to incredible offensive success. It just made them average instead of awful. Do you want that again? I don't really know. And then it just, end of the day, this number is the one that's got me worried about the Raptors offense as it stands right now. Look, things can change. They could trade Pascal Siakam and the whole thing is different. But right now, it's a pretty grim offensive picture. Last season, with Fred VanVleet on the floor, 116.1 offensive rating with him on the floor. It was the second highest on-court offensive rating of any player on the team, behind only Jakob Poeltl, among regulars. Ron Harper Jr. and Christian Koloko, a little bit higher, I think. But either way, 116.1 offensive rating with Fred on the floor. That would have been the 6th best offense in the NBA. It's pretty good. When Fred sat last year, which was not a lot, if you recall, he played like 38 minutes a game, but when he sat, it was a disaster show. The Raptors, with Fred off the floor last year, had 109.4 offensive rating. That was the worst mark for anyone on the team, like the biggest drop off, the worst mark when he was on the bench, 109.4. They were never at their worst more than they were at their worst when Fred sat. That would have been the 29th ranked offense in the NBA this past season. Really stinky, not good. Like, obviously there's potential for lineups that didn't get a ton of looks or run to get more run and maybe perform better offensively with more time together. But for the most part, not having Fred VanVleet was death for the Raptors offense last season. And I don't see how they've resolved that problem by losing Fred VanVleet and replacing him with Dennis Schroeder. It's not fixing that issue. Without his pull-up threat, there are just limited ways for the Raptors to bend the defense. And it's like, it's going to be on Darko to try to figure this out. Like, good luck, man, in your very first time as a head coach trying to figure out this offense. Maybe there's some ingenuity there. Again, I believe a lot in the power of basketball imagination and sort of putting the pieces together in a way that maybe other people haven't seen before or thought about before, but it's a really tall task for Darko Rajakovic to figure out how to get good offense out of this team. It just seems like it's going to be an uphill battle all season long if this is the group. Again, things can change. People can be brought in. We'll see. But as it stands right now, this could be like a top 5 defense, but a bottom 5 offense, which gets you pretty much to exactly 500, which is where you were this past year. We'll see, but that's kind of where I'm at. It's not ideal, man. We'll continue. There'll be some positive spin, I'm sure. Look, Fred VanVleet walking, there are some silver linings when it comes to assembling more depth. You don't have Schroeder and McDaniels kind of filling out that second unit. If you have Fred back, the depth is worse. Sure, that's a part of it. And maybe there's a way they can go and replace that vacancy in shooting. But right now, I'm struggling to see how this team plays anything resembling offense that is good, and that might lead us back to the thing off the top that we talked about, which is a Pascal Siakam trade, because this team probably just ain't really good enough to roll out next year. We'll see. I think the defense could be very good. I'm very bullish on the defense, and I'm excited to see some elements of this team, but the offense is going to be a slog, man. And for a group fan base that's watched offensive slogs now for a few seasons, I'm not terribly thrilled about it, but hey, that is what it is, and we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again on a Wednesday, as I'm sure there'll be more stuff that comes out between now and then, and we'll react to it thusly, and very much appreciate you taking the time to tune in. Please follow, subscribe, rate, review, join the Discord. Link is in the description, all that good stuff. It's always appreciated, but we'll leave you there. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have yourself a lovely rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye. Thanks for hanging.